Hello, I'm Duriadan Haq, also known as Daya. I'm an Indonesian Pakistani non-binary lesbian.
And I am Mariana Salem, aka Mary. I am a Lebanese Aboriginal bisexual woman.
We're two writers who love movies, television, and books, especially when they're gay.
And welcome to Gay V Club, where we'll be discussing and analysing LGBT texts
that we like, that we don't like, and how we relate to these texts as gay people of colour. Hello, everyone.
Hi, everybody.
Thank you for tuning in. If you like Gay V Club, please like, subscribe, rate, leave a nice review wherever you listen to podcasts. We're on Twitter and Instagram at gayv_club. We also have a Patreon if you want to support us. We're at patreon.com/gayvclub, and we've got a bunch of nice little bonus episodes if you're interested.
And thank you to the legends who have signed up.
And thank you to the legends who already are.
But also just a general thank you, because this podcast is like a year old now, which is amazing. And so thank you for people who have been listening to it. I just realised there's a new TMA episode today. Exciting. Another Elias Bouchardless day, most likely.
Alright, so speaking of TMA, Halloween is coming up soon.
Yep.
Halloween is not really a thing in Australia, actually.
It really isn't.
Corporations keep trying to make it a thing, but they fail miserably every single year. It's so funny that they're trying to make me buy, shit with pumpkins on it. No.
The pumpkin thing especially is weird because
and,
it's
the decorations and stuff.
We don't do that whole pumpkin carving thing. It's not a thing here.
No.
Something that I do like about Halloween is that, this is the time I get to see my fave shitty horror movies at the cinema usually. There's usually some Blumhouse $5 movie to go and see, and I usually have a good time. That's my favourite part about Halloween as an Australian is the movies.
Yeah, horror movies get released in October anyway.
Yeah.
So we get a bunch of horror movies at this time. It's also just if you're an adult, it's just a good excuse to throw a party.
Mm-hmm.
But not this year.
No, absolutely. It is not an excuse to throw a party this year.
No. Anyways, Mary, what are we talking about today?
We're going to talk about many things, but the main crux of that thing that we're going to talk about is Jennifer's body.
Yes. Basically just lesbian sexuality in horror.
Yeah, and some gender stuff in horror too.
And maybe a bit of gay stuff even.
All the stuff. It's just going to be a spoopy episode. A spooky time.
A spoopy episode, yes.
But yeah, mostly we're going to talk about Jennifer's mind. Not just her body, but her mind.
Yeah. So when the subject of cinema that was too ahead of its time gets brought up, there are two titles that come to mind.
Yep.
In my mind, at least. The first is Sam Raimi's 2007 masterpiece, Spider-Man 3. And the second movie is, of course, Karyn Kusama's 2009 masterpiece, Jennifer's Body, written by Diablo Cody, starring Megan Fox and Amanda Seyfried.
Just, it's not really relevant to this podcast, but when I think of a movie ahead of its time, I think of Catwoman, 2003.
Excellent. Yep. You're correct. Yep. So for a very long time, Jennifer's Body has been regarded as a bad film, sometimes a good bad film. Why do you think that is, Mariana?
What's my take?
What's your short answer?
My short answer is I was one of the people that didn't know this movie existed until a couple of years ago. Till one night I decided I'm going to watch this, and I had a great time. And even when I watched it then, I couldn't understand, why had I never heard about this movie before, what was it, 2018, 2019 when I watched it?
What?
Yeah.
You watched it that late?
I really did. When I say to people, I came to the Jennifer's Body party really late. So, it's interesting for me to watch the conversations about it because I'm sort of on the other side. There are people that talk about it you should have appreciated this movie then. People who saw it when it came out and were like, oh, this is amazing. And people don't realize. I was one of the people that realized because I actually had never heard of it until 3 years ago.
Okay. Why do you think that is, Mariana?
Why do I think that I had never heard of it?
Why do you think it was regarded as bad for a long time?
I don't know. I think there's a lot of complex reasons. I think one is general misogyny and sexism, but working on a lot of levels. I feel like I want to go into that a little bit later. Why do you think that people thought it was bad when it came out, Dale?
Well, Mariana, I wrote this in a food court. Okay. To be fair, you have to have a very high IQ To be fair, you have to have a very high IQ to understand Jennifer's Body. The humor is extremely subtle, and without a solid grasp of theoretical lesbianism, most of the jokes will go over the typical viewer's head. There's also Jennifer's nihilistic outlook, which is definitely woven into her characterization. Her personal philosophy draws heavily from Margaret Atwood literature.
It does. I fully agree with you. Like, yes, keep going.
The gays understand this stuff. They have the intellectual capacity to truly appreciate the depths of these jokes and to realize that they're not just funny. They say something deep about life. As a consequence, people who dislike Jennifer's Body truly are idiots because, of course, they wouldn't appreciate, for instance, the humor in Jennifer Check's existential catchphrase, crossing you out, which in itself is a cryptic reference to Anne Carson's translation of the Greek epic An Oresteia. I'm smirking right now just imagining one of those addle-pated simpletons scratching their heads in confusion as Karyn Kusama and Diablo Cody's genius wit unfolds itself on their television screens. What fools. How I pity them.
Fools indeed. Hear. Fools,
yeah, I'm done.
Fools, you can hear them squeaking away in their clown shoes.
I'm just really praying that people understood that joke because it went on for way too long and I'm really sorry. But yes, so Jennifer's Body is a film released in 2009. When it was released, it was universally panned. It's got like 43% on Rotten Tomatoes. Everyone who went to see it didn't get what they were expecting. Did you know that after it bombed in America, they actually cancelled the Australian release? So that's also one of the reasons why you've never heard of it, because they never actually released this movie in Australia. Last year, I went to it was basically a 10-year anniversary screening of Jennifer's Body. And it was technically like the Australian premiere of Jennifer's Body. And because it was the extended version, it was technically the world premiere of the extended version.
Wow.
And it was really cool because it was organized by like these people that actually got in touch with Karyn Kusama and did a little Skype interview with her that they showed after the movie.
Sorry, I have a question. What's in the extended version that's not in the theatrical version? Because I think I've only seen the theatrical version.
The extended version doesn't have that much difference. There's more focus on like the grief, I guess, of the parents in the extended version.
Okay.
But other than that, there's maybe like a few random jokes here and there.
Okay.
I'd actually already seen the extended version before this screening because it is available on some of the Blu-ray releases. So if you are interested in watching it, you can probably find it. I think the runtime is about the same, except maybe it's like 2 minutes longer.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
So it wasn't even released in Australia. It's also known as one of the most mismarketed films of all time. Like, now that people are having more conversations about Jennifer's Body, it's been cited as one of the most mismarketed films of all time.
How is it mismarketed?
Because this was back in 2009. It was starring Megan Fox, obviously, and she had just like got off Transformers, and the way it was marketed was, oh, this is Twilight for boys. Go watch this because Megan Fox is hot.
Oh, good lord. Why would just that description...
Which is, like, tragic. If you actually watch the trailer for Jennifer's Body, it's very much like that. Like, the trailer in summation is like, Megan Fox hot. Go watch this movie to see Megan Fox hot. Also, Cobra Starship is on the soundtrack. So, yeah, basically, when this film came out, whoever did the marketing... And this is something that Diablo Cody, Megan Fox, and Karyn Kusama like really like angry about and have spoken about. Basically, they didn't understand who this film was for, and this film was made for women. Back in 2009, at a time where men only thought of Megan Fox as hot and women just hated Megan Fox for being hot and other things, women just didn't go to see this movie because they weren't told that it was for them.
We all owe Megan Fox such a huge apology, like we as a society. But yes, please continue.
So this film was made for women. I would argue even that this movie is made for lesbians and just women who love women. Over the last 10 years, it's become kind of a cult classic. Like in the last 2 years, it got a more appreciation in the mainstream. But I feel like over the last decade, the legacy of this movie was kept alive by the gays.
Very much so.
Very much so, because it was just regarded as bad for so long, and the only people that actually enjoyed it, that like quoted it,
that were posting the
that
memes,
could understand the true genius, that had the pretty high IQ.
Yep.
were the gays.
You are correct.
Including me.
Including you, yes.
So what do you think it is about this movie that makes it a movie for women?
For me, it has to do with the dialogue and the way they talk to each other in this very heightened way. But also, it's not just the dialogue, it's like what they talk about. Like all those iconic lines, you know, like moveon.org, you know, and all.
PMS isn't real,
Yeah.
Mimi. It was invented by the boy run media.
I feel like this is absolutely the kind of crap that high school girls say to each other. And I like that when that dialogue is presented, it's not presented in a way where it's looking down on it or making fun of it. It's actually being like, look at these girls.
It's presented in a, this is so cool
listen,
way.
look how cool these girls
This is so
are.
hilarious.
Like, look how clever they actually are that they come up with this. But also look how much pain they are in. I think this movie, you know, you say it's made for, like, Woolloowa, and I would go further and say it's made for, like, teen Woolloowa, or at least, like, Woolloowa who wish their high school experience to be something, or maybe never saw themselves in, like, high school movies and things. And this movie is, like, it's kind of like the revenge in a way.
Yeah.
And I think because it has an honesty to it, but almost like this rabid honesty in the way that it's presenting Jennifer's rage and also Needy's torment.
Just like the way that it presents friendships when you're a teenage girl with other teenage girls is so accurate. Just like the intensity of those kinds of relationships. It's insane. It makes me crazy, actually. Like it's like that's the most horrific part of the movie,
and it presents them like,
for me,
it presents them like a horror because they feel that way. They feel so intense.
Hell is a teenage girl.
They feel so intense. They feel so scary. And, like, I remember, like, I don't know, you probably do too, but every person who you were friends with as a teen who you were then not friends with anymore for, like, whatever reason, the pain of that is unparalleled. It hurts. But also, like, you know, I think a lot of people had that friend that they were, like, obsessed with, especially if you're a Woolloowa, and, like, you couldn't articulate it at the time for whatever. And I feel like this film speaks to that a lot as well. I do think that this film is just made for young women in so many ways.
Maybe not teenagers specifically. Like, I think it's more made for, like, people in the early 20s.
Yes.
At its core, it is a satire that subverts the horror genre and the way that it depicts teenage girls.
And also the way men in horror movies treat young women. I think because this movie is so systematically for women, like it's not just this one scene is for women or this one character is for women, like the whole thing, it's like really hard to pick out one thing. Like I can definitely speak to this being made for women. But yeah, I don't know. I remember when I first watched this movie, I actually watched it with one of my best friends from school who we've been through school together since kindergarten. And after this movie, we watched this movie for the first time together. We both like sat in her car for like 4 hours talking about all the weird crap that went down in our friend group in high school. So this movie did have like a profound effect on the way I was thinking about not my nostalgia for high school, but like the way that I thought about my high school experience was like, I don't know, somewhat informed in a different way after I watched this movie.
Okay.
I do feel like this movie very much talks to what it's like to be in high school as a teen girl who is probably in love with their best friend and doesn't really know it or can't really articulate it, but it's also a doomed friendship anyway. So what do you do with all of that? What do you do with all of that other than like scream? Why do you think it's made for women?
Well, you know, it's important to note, obviously, Karyn Kusama is a woman.
What?
Diablo Cody is a woman.
Yes.
Megan Fox is a woman. Amanda Seyfried is a woman. And did you know, Mary, women have minds? Back to the mismarketing and the way that this was marketed as Twilight for boys. Come see Megan Fox be hot and, oh, maybe she kisses a girl, because that was definitely in the trailer. I think the way that it depicts violence and the way that it depicts revenge is also very much, if you're a man, you're not really gonna enjoy this movie. Like, if you're a man coming into this movie thinking that it's gonna be made for you because that fucking everything is made for you, you're going to be quite shocked by this movie, because this movie is Jennifer having a murderous revenge rampage, literally ripping up boys. You know, even in the trailer, there's that iconic line. It's like, you're killing people. No, I'm killing boys. It's crazy that that line made it into the trailer, but people still thought it was for boys to ogle Megan Fox. But yeah, the dehumanization of men and the male gaze and the way that it's not gratifying for them in any way. Not really.
No.
Maybe there are a bunch of shots that were put together to make a trailer for this movie that may seem gratifying, but it's really not gratifying for men in any way.
There's also no one good man. Do you know what I mean?
Mm.
Like, there are a lot of revenge movies, I feel, where there's, like, one good man, and that character is there to be, like, not all men.
Because the thing is, a lot of people don't quite perceive it as a revenge story anyway.
How could they not, though?
They make that mistake. Jennifer's Body also just deals with a lot of themes that mostly women are gonna care about, like the whole... Have we explained the plot yet? Do we have to? I'm not gonna explain the plot.
Please go and watch Jennifer's Body and come back.
But yeah, like the whole thing of Jennifer, you know, turning into a demon because she was violently murdered by these men. The whole lead up to it is framed as if it's like sexual assault, like the way that they drug her and kidnap her and ask her, you know, is she a virgin or not, and all these things. The movie title itself, Jennifer's Body, is actually named after a song by the band Hole. And the actual song itself is quite a creepy song that is almost definitely about a woman being assaulted.
Ugh.
Some of the lyrics of this song: the pieces of Jennifer's body, found pieces of Jennifer's body, found pieces of Jennifer's body. Just relax, go to sleep. You're hungry, but I'm starving. He cuts you down from the tree. He keeps you in a box by the bed, alive, but just barely. Yeah, so it's a really creepy song, actually.
Hell?
Like, it slaps. It slaps as a song, but it is quite creepy. You know the song that plays in the end?
Is that Jennifer's...
That's also by the same... No, that's not Jennifer's Body, but it's by the same band.
Oh. Weird that they didn't put Jennifer's Body in Jennifer's Body.
I prefer the other song that they chose as an ending song because it's a bit more, I don't know, triumphant, I'd say. She wanted to call it that because she's just like, it's a creepy song, like a horror movie. And yeah, it is like a horror movie. Something I find quite interesting about the way that Jennifer's Body has gotten more love and appreciation in the mainstream over the last few years is the way that it's kind of contested now, actually, as to whether or not the film is gay. I believe this is mostly due to straight women who have grown to love the film, who want to distance themselves from that part of the film and separate themselves by erasing that part of the film. But I think there are also some gay people who have the wrong idea and don't realize that this movie is very much for them.
I saw this weird video someone made on TikTok where they were like, one of the reasons I don't like Jennifer's Body, it's because it's got like two straight girls playing gay girls. And I was like, first of all, Megan Fox is bisexual. She's quoted saying this many times. If you don't know this, you can Google it.
There's a quote by Megan Fox, who is bisexual, where she said, she's like, people expected Jennifer's Body to make so much money, but I was doubtful. The movie is about a man-eating, cannibalistic lesbian cheerleader, and that pretty much eliminates middle America. It's obviously a girl power movie, but it's also about how scary girls are. Girls can be a nightmare. End quote.
Thank you, Miss Fox.
So Megan Fox herself has said that. Diablo Cody has said of the film she wanted to convey that there was more than just friendship between these two girls and thought the kiss scene was enough. And then there is the kiss scene itself. It does feel a little bit random, I'd say.
I don't think it does.
I don't know, maybe like to your average viewer, like the way that they don't talk about it, it just feels random. It's just like, oh yeah, because, you know, this is just Megan Fox being hot, so like of course she's kissing a girl.
My interpretation of that scene, like when they kiss, is it's because like they've done that before and that's why they don't really talk about it.
Oh, yeah, they probably have.
That's how I interpret it.
We can play boyfriend, girlfriend, yep.
That's literally how I was like, oh, they've done that before, obviously. I didn't think it was weird that they didn't talk about it at all because it just seemed very normal for them.
There's loads of scenes throughout the movie where you can tell that it's a very intense love between these girls. There's also the fact that it's kind of implied that Needy has like a psychic connection to Jennifer because she drank some of her blood when they were in the sandbox when they were like 2 years old or something. That's how she always knows when Jennifer's around. There's the way Jennifer's just like, I couldn't do that to you. I couldn't eat you. Sorry, I couldn't, you know, I didn't eat you because I couldn't do that to you because, you know, ... There's also even the last scene. It's technically the last time Needy sees Jennifer alive. when the van door closes and she's just watching, and it's actually quite sad.
It's horrible.
They're looking at each other and then the van door closes and then the bar explodes behind Needy because her whole world has just exploded because she doesn't have Jennifer, because Jennifer is her whole world. Cinema.
I just think there's so much flirting, like, in the first 10 minutes of this film. Like, I don't really understand.
Wear something cute.
Yeah, wear something cute. And, like, literally there's the whole lesbi gay line. I don't know what more... Like, when people say that this movie isn't gay, I actually don't know.
I go both ways.
I don't know what more could you possibly want. Do you really, like, are you this obtuse that you actually need people to say, like, hello, my name is Jennifer Check. I am a lesbian.
To, like, come out.
Yeah. But then it's weird because when there are things like that, people will go, well, why isn't it more subtle? Why isn't it more subtle? Why is this so, why can't it be, you know, like, what do you want? Which one do you want? You can't, sometimes.
They don't want it at all.
That's true. Have you considered you actually maybe don't want to see this? That's internalized homophobia, love.
Or it's just homophobia. From non-gay people. Yeah. So that's why the movie is gay, because...
Because it is.
Yeah.
Period.
Because Megan Fox sets her tongue on fire with a lighter and says, I'm a god. And that's all the proof that you need. Really?
But also there's the whole movie.
That's all the proof that you need. Like, you know, smells like Thai food in here. You're lime green jello and you can't even admit it to yourself. Shutties. This movie is so funny. I love this movie
also,
so much.
Also, the humor, it hasn't aged badly.
No, the humor was, like, so ahead of its time.
I actually think it's funnier now. It is way funnier now.
The lead singer is extra salty.
The way Adam Brody, like, tries to redeem himself from what he did to Jennifer in Ready or Not, I think that it's gonna...
Nah, bitch. You cannot be redeemed.
It's gonna take a lot more, Mr. Brody. You may have looked very good in Ready or Not and gave me a crisis for the full length of that movie, but, like, I do not forgive. I do not forgive Mr. Brody. When Megan Fox, in that 10-year anniversary interview she did with Diablo Cody, when she spoke about how she put Jennifer's body on for her son, and her son was so distraught.
For her son who was like 5 or something.
Watching the scene where she was dying, that the kid actually thought that, like, she died physically, and Megan had to be like, no, I'm here, it's fine, like, it's just a movie. I think that maybe showing a child Jennifer's body is not a good move. But, you know.
That is a very horrific scene, though.
It is. It's very horrendous. It's meant to be, though.
Often the way that women are violently murdered in horror is, especially if it's a male director and a male writer, it's always kind of, I don't know, fetishized and like titillating. But no, that one is genuinely horrific. There's a bunch of just genuinely horrific things in the movie. In that interview Karyn Kusama did at that screening, she talks about how she feels that she has a responsibility when she portrays violence. And, you know, you can tell this in her other films like The Invitation and in Destroyer as well. So the violence in Jennifer's body is also, like, it's portrayed with a lot more responsibility that is not usually afforded to horror films when a man is making them.
It's responsible while also being realistic. In as much as you can be realistic when filming a scene where a, you know, indie band sacrifices a teen girl to the devil.
Crouching over a dead boy and scooping blood with her hands.
Yes.
When her jaw unhinges, iconic.
This film is very visually pretty. Yeah, I think it's actually beautiful. The cinematography in it is really... I love the colours. Everyone knows me and I love a colourful film. I hate dull colour palettes. It's one of the reasons why there are some David Fincher films I just won't watch, because I'm like, what do you hate colour for, Mr. Fincher?
What do you mean, bitch?
He
loves colour.
Does he?
One colour.
Does he?
Yes, he does.
Okay.
Shut up.
All right.
You don't understand his genius.
Oh, don't.
To be fair, you have to have a really high IQ.
But, you know, as per your point, I think this movie for me, I think it was actually one of the first horror movies I'd watched that I consciously knew was directed by a woman, so I was actually looking for the difference. Do you know what I mean? Did you know, I just want to bring this up because I think it's like a very interesting little point. A 2017 study conducted by Google and the Gina Davis Institute, just as a side note, the Gina Davis Institute has like really cool statistics. Well, they're not cool, some of them are actually quite depressing, but they're always doing these studies on Hollywood to determine like the representation of women in various genres. They're the ones that come out with those pie charts that are like, here's how many films released this year were made by women, and they keep track of all that. They're really good. Sometimes I just scroll through there and I'm like, oh dear, this is sad. But anyway, a 2017 study conducted by Google and the Gina Davis Institute found that out of all the cinematic genres, horror is the only one in which women are seen on screen more than men, and to be exact, it's 53% more than men. Horror movies also feature a higher proportion of women versus men in speaking roles than any other genre at 47% of screen time. Despite women being very dominant in that genre, I feel like it makes up a lot of what I simultaneously like and don't like about the horror genre. Things I love about it on like a surface level sound really good. You know, I do like that women are often protagonists in horror. I do like that women are very often queer-coded in horror. And women in horror films were often very self-determined and very autonomous and had very intense motivations.
The protagonists, at least.
Yeah, the protagonists, at least. This leads into the whole final girl trope. Often the woman survives. And the woman survives by being resourceful and complex and messy. And on the surface, this all sounds really great. But the motivations behind this in a lot of horror, because a lot of horror is made by men, I feel like it's very funny because a lot of these sort of, like when you do see a woman in a horror film, even though you as a woman might relate to her, often because it's made by a man, you actually know that, you know, the reason she's being written the way she is in this messy, resourceful way is because, like...
Is because you hate
yeah,
them.
It's
because, like, this man hates women.
This man hates women.
So, like...
And he wants...
And, like, I just happen to think this kind of woman is cool, but he writes it that way because...
But he also kind of
them.
wants he wants you to hate this person enough as well. Like, he doesn't want you to fully... They don't want you to fully like her, because otherwise, like, they couldn't be violent to her and you not care and all this stuff.
Yeah.
Also, on the same point, most of the time if women in horror are queer-coded, it's because of homophobia, down and out. There's actually a huge history of female sexuality being demonized, literally demonized in horror. Jennifer's Body is satirizing that in a lot of ways. It is. It absolutely is. This has been happening in quote-unquote horror for such a long time, literally since the witch-burning days. People have written about the horrors of women and their sexuality, and oh no. Also, even though I love the final girl, and I love that concept, you know, there is issues in that the final girl is almost always white. People of colour in general, they're not often alive in horror for very long.
The fact that it's well known, oh, the black person is going to die first in a horror movie.
I do this all the time. If I sit down and watch a horror movie that I haven't seen and I see a black character in the group of friends that's mostly white people, I'm like, yeah, they're gonna go. Rest in peace to this man.
Rest in peace, William Jackson Harper.
Sorry.
I hate Midsommar so much, it's unreal!
I think men put women through horror in horror films because they want to torture women, honestly. And I think it's really horrible because it actually does show that they're aware of how traumatic this stuff is. They're aware, like, of how it makes women feel.
Or just how people of colour feel.
But instead of actually addressing it, they're just like, oh, I'm just going to profit off it in stories.
Well, yeah, because when they're making these films containing women, they're not making it for women, they're making it for men like them. And filmmakers make what they want to see.
Yes.
And they want to see women being brutalized.
Yeah, it's just very disheartening. I actually love the horror genre. It's actually very strange. I didn't realize I loved the horror genre for a long time until, I don't know, I started reading about horror and I was like, yeah, like, this is why. But yeah, I do like that there has been more recent horror stuff that centers on women, but in a very different way. Stuff like, I mean, The Babadook is an example, but I also think movies like Us, the latest Halloween film. I haven't seen the second season of the Haunting series on Netflix.
Bly Manor is very much about women.
But
it's about lesbians.
Yeah, focus not just on women, but what happens after the horror You know, like what happens
Hmm.
after they've gone through like an experience of trauma, of horror, and like how do they deal with that? Even Hereditary is about this, which is why I like it. It's about this idea of intergenerational trauma, like specifically with women. In the new Halloween movie that was made in 2018, it's set, 25 years or 30 years after the original Halloween movie. And I really like the way it showed that Jamie Lee Curtis's character had become like very hardened and very frightened because of what happened to her with Michael Myers. It presented that like in a very sympathetic way, but also they didn't shy away from the fact that it had damaged her relationship with her daughter because she tried to raise her daughter to be like, don't go outside and don't do this. And the daughter really resented her for instilling all this fear in her.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's her granddaughter who's in high school who is trying to sort of toe the line between her mum and Jamie Lee Curtis. But of course, you know, the movie follows when Michael Myers like breaks out and comes back for Jamie Lee Curtis. But I really like how a lot of the movie is actually about how Jamie Lee Curtis couldn't really get over what happened to her and how that affected the rest of her family. And it struck me because it's the first time I actually saw something that went, hey, what happens to women in horror movies is actually pretty horrendous. And it's not the kind that is actually heroic. Like, while the movies may end with them, like, defeating the horror or defeating the evil, they're probably going to be pretty messed up for the rest of their lives. The Haunting of Hill House obviously also dealt with this. So yeah, I don't know. I do like that we are seeing this genre that is no less terrifying, but it's actually being much more sympathetic to how women are treated in horror films. And how they're treated is not a trope. It's a full-on trauma. And I actually think in a lot of ways that's like far more scary when it's taken seriously. Because you're like, oh yeah, that's a real human.
Yeah.
Because it does make you think, like, yeah, if this happened to me, I would be totally messed up.
And that's another way that Jennifer's Body is ahead of its time, because Jennifer's Body is very much a movie that does that. It's not even like after the horror, it's like showing the horror in real time. You see the horror that happens to Jennifer, but you also see the horror that Needy is going through, trying to save Jennifer. It's quite sad. Like, you know that I'm killing boys scene that didn't make it into the movie? Like, that's just a snippet of a deleted scene. And in the scene, Needy has gone to the library and she's trying to tell Jennifer, she's just like, I'm trying to find a way to save you.
Oh.
I'm looking at all these ways, like, we can fix this. And Jennifer says no.
One of my favorite articles I read recently was how horror helps with processing grief and trauma, because it does, you know, inadvertently, even, you know, a lot of male filmmakers do this without realizing, it's showing the processing of a trauma, you know, especially with Jennifer's Body, you know, she was killed by those guys. The whole movie is her essentially processing what happened to her by, like, hunting down and killing these boys. That's, like, very cathartic for people to watch.
Jennifer, she takes her revenge. That's her way of processing it. Needy, the horror that happens to Needy is she has to kill her best friend. She has to kill the person that she loves the most. The movie starts and she's in a mental institution. Yes. She has been dealing with that. And the movie ends, like, the way that she chooses to process it is the same way that Jennifer does, by taking revenge, except she specifically seeks out the people that did this to Jennifer.
Yes, exactly. And I think a good horror movie is actually one that is profoundly cathartic because it gives a space to process trauma in a messy but meaningful way, maybe.
Or it can give you that space. It can
give you that space. It doesn't have to. I don't think every horror movie should do that, but like...
It doesn't have to, and for a long time it very much didn't do that.
I think there's always that element that can be considered.
Back to the queer coding of women in horror. Often it's actually not queer coding at all. They're often just straight up lesbians or bi women.
That is true.
Horror is actually one of the most profitable low-risk genres. Only a very small amount of people going to see a horror movie are going to be alienated. Unfortunately, back in 2009, this didn't work in Jennifer's Body's favor. But in general, horror is a genre that you get to take risks because it's often low budget, and like people that want to see horror often want to see weird stuff, so it doesn't matter. You can put weird stuff in your movie and it doesn't matter. And in some cases, the weird stuff is... and sometimes the weird stuff is Willowa, not that... In case you haven't noticed...
I'm weird!
I'm sorry. Like, have you ever seen me with a guy? That's fucking weird. But yeah, so they're often straight up lesbians. In preparation for this episode, I actually checked to see if there were any video essays on
There are
YouTube.
heaps.
So I just searched, lesbians in horror. And actually, no, there aren't any specific video essays on lesbians in horror, but basically I just got like a ton of short films. Like, a lot of them were independently made short films. A few of them were like full feature-length B-grade movies that were, exploitative. A lot of them were like, I don't know, clips from horror movies or horror shows that show lesbians kissing. The Jennifer's Body kiss scene is there. The American Horror Story Hotel scene is there. It's also very important to note here that gay men are not given this same visibility in horror as lesbians. But the only reason that lesbians have a higher visibility, like the main reason, is that we're being fetishized by the straight men that make these movies. Unfortunately, when gay men are part of horror movies, it's often either subtext or it's homophobic torture porn. I mean, technically a lot of lesbianism in horror is just homophobic torture porn, but in a different fetishized way. But yeah, lesbians are all over horror. Not just screen, actually. The first vampire novel, Carmilla, is about a lesbian vampire, and again, it's very much demonizing her sexuality, like, oh no. This
evil whore.
This horrendous blood-sucking dyke. Even Carmilla is based on a poem called Christabel, which is also about a lesbian vampire. Basically, like, they don't have the term vampire, but it's basically about that.
Why do you think there are so many lesbian vampires?
I did a Gothic literature course a few years back where we looked at this, and I guess to summarize, in Western mythos, the female vampire was traditionally depicted as being like a very sexual, monstrous being. She was a seductress using her feminine wiles to corrupt men and make them want to have sex with them and have control.
As you were speaking, I am thinking of Mina Harker in League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and
oh man,
yeah, me watching this movie at 10 years old, going, oh boy, I hope this doesn't awaken anything in me.
Yeah, I love Mina Murray. Fuck Jonathan Harker.
Yes.
But anyway, male vampires, meanwhile, were like the total opposite. They were completely desexualized, and if there was any seduction involved, it's because they have like magical hypnotism powers. And so vampires in Western mythos reflect the fears of the society at the time, and that society was very Christian. Dracula, written by Irishman Bram Stoker, was, like a wealthy aristocrat who denounced God. Nosferatu was created as straight-up anti-Semitic propaganda. So male vampires back then represented whatever that particular Christian society hated, but female vampires represented whatever all those Christian societies hated about women and women's sexuality, including women with same-sex attraction. Anyways, funny I should mention female vampires. Because Jennifer's Body is very much a subversion of a lot of different horror tropes, this includes the lesbian vampire, like the sexualized lesbian vampire horror trope. And I actually think that Jennifer's Body is like a Dracula adaptation, but it's focusing on the character Lucy Westenra.
Wow.
Because Lucy Westenra in Dracula, she is Mina's best friend. She's like kind of slutty, or like she talks as if she is slutty. I don't know, Mina insists that she's, pure and stuff. But yeah, she's very overtly sexual and like euphemistic when she's speaking to men. She has many suitors. She's very just like aggressively heterosexual. And I feel like that aggressive heterosexual behavior is actually coming from the fact that she is a repressed lesbian that is in love with Mina. And I think that same behavior, you can see that with Jennifer.
You know what? You are correct.
In Jennifer's Body. I am correct. And Lucy is actually Dracula's first victim in England. When he gets there, like, she is the first person. He does assault her and he turns her into a vampire. And she's like this monstrous thing that has to be defeated. And the same thing happens to Jennifer Check in Jennifer's Body. I don't know. I haven't actually been able to find Diablo Cody talking about this at all, but I do very much believe that Jennifer Check is a reinvention of the character Lucy Westenra.
You are right. You are so right, actually. I look, honestly, when I saw this in the Google Doc, when I saw your Lucy Westenra parallels in capital letters, I was a bit like, oh my god, this is gonna be like you and Dan.
This is gonna be me like that It's Always Sunny cap.
Literally, yeah. Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. I was like, you've got your, you get that glint in your eye when you're talking about Lucy Westenra and Mina. You get this glint in your eye. It's like, you're like, I can relate it to this. And I just sort of, I love you and support you. But I'm always worried, like, are you going to see this in everything? But actually, no, I see it in this. I see it in this. You've convinced me.
I don't see it in a lot of things.
When you get to write your Lucy and Mina story, I'm like gonna be so...
No, but like Karyn Kusama was maybe COVID has shot everything to hell, but it was like announced that Karyn Kusama was gonna do an adaptation of Dracula.
Oh my god. So is
like
this...
a few months
is
back.
that basically your confirmation that that's what she was intending with Jennifer's body?
I don't know. Maybe. I remember, like, in response to that, people were just like, cast Megan Fox as Dracula. I'm like, no, cast Megan Fox as Lucy and make the movie about Lucy.
Yeah.
Because fuck Dracula. Fuck Adam Brody's character.
He has enough, like, Drac has enough. He has enough things. Like, just let him rest.
And also, Karyn Kusama is just a really cool visionary anyway. Like, why would she tell the same story again?
No, she wouldn't.
I don't know if Megan Fox would be involved, but I think, she's definitely going to do something fun with that.
Sort of relating to that. One thing I really like about Jennifer's Body, and one of the reasons why I was so surprised that I hadn't seen it before, was because it's a horror comedy. And I love horror comedy. I love what we do in the shadows and the apocalypse.
Shaun of the Dead.
Yeah, Shaun of the Dead.
There's so many horror comedies that are like zombie stuff.
Yeah, because I feel like that genre has done so much. It's like you can make fun of a lot.
Have you seen Bit yet?
Bit? No, not yet.
Bit is a really fun vampire movie. The main character is a trans lesbian and it's actually played by a trans girl. It's kind of B-grade, but it's still so fun. The movie ends and she's just like, I hope they make more of these. I promise I won't get pregnant in the fourth one.
One of the reasons I love horror comedy is because I feel like on the surface it should seem like horror and comedy shouldn't go together. But I think like really good horror comedies like do manage to find that balance. And I don't know if Jordan Peele actually said this or whether it was in an essay I read about Jordan Peele transition to horror from comedy, but it said something along the lines that horror and comedy are very symbiotic and they're not that different from each other. The only difference between horror and comedy is that in comedy you are building up tension to relieve it with a joke, but in horror you're building it up for the tension. And when you think of horror and comedy like that, it's very easy to see why they can go together quite nicely, because you can have a movie that utilizes horror but like relieves the tension using comedy.
Because horror is comedy backwards.
Yes!
I think he said
He
that.
did say that. Okay, yeah. Horror is comedy backwards. So I do think that they go really well together, and I like Jennifer's Body because I actually think it's a really good example of horror comedy. Because I think really good horror comedies still don't shy away from the scariness. I always cite that moment in What We Do in the Shadows when Peter dies, and it's actually really horrible.
Yeah. It's so sad when Peter
It's
dies.
really sad. Even though the movie is really funny, when that happens, it's genuinely very sad.
The way that Viagra's crying.
Yeah.
That gets me.
Yeah, so I don't think there's a reason you can't have a horror comedy that still makes people feel. And, Jennifer's Body is a lot like that. Even though there's all these iconic, hilarious, like, my tit, that line occurs during the scene where, Needy literally murders her best friend.
Speaking of the my tit scene,
Please.
that joke is also, I don't know, a commentary on the fact that women are so often sexualized in horror. Jennifer gets fucking stabbed through the heart and she's thinking about her boobs.
And then she's like, you mean your heart?
Do you buy all your murder weapons from Home Depot?
You're so
God, you're butch. Now I'm thinking of that moment where Jennifer's seeing the best friends forever necklace ripped off Needy and she just lets Needy kill her because she knows it's over.
Yeah. See, example.
I really want a Jennifer's Body sequel. Here's my pitch for a Jennifer's Body
Tell
sequel.
us your pitch.
I don't care if someone steals it. Like, I don't care. Like, just make
Yeah.
this. I mean, I would prefer if everyone who was originally involved to be involved in this, but it's never going to happen anyway because Disney owns the rights to this movie now. So my idea of a Jennifer's Body sequel is very similar to the Fight Club sequel. For people that don't know, there is a sequel for Fight Club that's like a comic book. And in it, Tyler just resurfaces. So every time the narrator goes to sleep, he becomes Tyler again. And Tyler just continues to wreak havoc and shit as he always has. So I would like something very similar to happen here where, you know, this is after Needy's killed those dudes and I don't know, maybe she's like trying to live her life. Maybe she's, I don't know, moved to another country and like, I don't know, taken up an alias or something or I don't know, something.
Ooh.
And basically, because Needy and Jennifer have that psychic connection from drinking each other's blood and stuff from when they were in the sandbox.
Yes.
And also the fact that Jennifer has bit Needy and Needy has inherited her powers. I want Jennifer herself to resurface in Needy. When Needy goes to sleep, she becomes Jennifer.
This is actually so good.
So when Needy is awake and herself, she starts to like suspect that Jennifer has come back because she sees like all these clues and hints and she's like looking for Jennifer, but actually she is Jennifer and Jennifer is her. And then something, I don't know, happens. I haven't figured out like how they become separate people. But yeah, so basically she just sees traces of Jennifer everywhere and she's like been leaving signs for her to follow. And those signs are dead bodies. Yeah.
Yeah. No.
So someone go do something with that.
That's very cool. Get Karyn Kusama on the line.
But yeah, that's my idea.
I love it.
Which is
I actually love it. It gives me, I don't know, it kind of makes
you could do a lot
makes
of cool
me think
shit.
of that season of Mr. Robot where Elliot keeps waking up and seeing that he's been somewhere and like he doesn't.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. The reason that I would like that sequel is because, you know, ultimately, as much as I love Jennifer's Body and as much as I'm like very satisfied with it, I'm still very saddened by it because it's a really sad ending for Needy and Jennifer, and I would like it to not be.
Yes, that's true.
Something that I also like in the last few years, you know, lesbians kind of existed in horror for titillation and demonization, but kind of in the last few years, there have been more films actually where lesbians in horror are actually like a solace.
Like Good Manners.
Yeah, like Good Manners, like What Keeps You Alive. This is also what basically the new, like spoilers for Haunting of Bly Manor, but that's basically what the lesbians are in Haunting of Bly Manor. Like they're a really nice solace, I guess.
Aww.
Like, oh, we're gonna calm down from all the scary shit and just have a nice time with these soft lesbians.
That's nice.
Personally, I found them actually quite boring. In Bly Manor, I only cared about Hannah Gross.
I don't know who that is. I haven't watched it.
Tania Miller's character.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, they may be boring, but it's nice that lesbians have increasingly become more like a solace.
But also, isn't it nice that they're boring and not, like, horrible?
Yeah, it's nice that they're boring and not horrible as well, I suppose. Dee Reese has been talking about making a lesbian horror movie for ages, and I don't know what's happening with that. I hope she gets to make it.
It's something that's not talked about enough, but I do think that the horror genre is very subjective. Just as someone who's a critic, I'd find it really hard to review a horror film simply because what people find scary is very subjective.
Yeah.
You know, there are things that I find scary that other people might not. And I think I said to you while we were listening to the Magnus Archives, because every separate episode is like its own little story, because in the first few seasons of Magnus Archives, they're just taking these statements of these supernatural or horror occurrences that have happened to other people. And I said to you, while I was listening, I said, oh, I bet if you made a note of which episodes of the Magnus Archives you found the most terrifying, you would actually get to the root of what you find the most scary.
That's very interesting. It's almost like this. It's almost like there's, I don't know, 16 specific kinds of horror.
Yeah, that's so specific. But one thing I noticed, I actually did kind of do that. Like I scrolled back through the Magnus Archives and I was like, oh yeah, I really like this one. I really like this one. And an element that I noticed that a lot of these had in common, not all of them, a lot of them were the idea of being chased. Apparently, I'm very scared of that.
Okay. Side note, TMA is also one of those examples where the gay romance is like a solace.
Yes.
In the midst of all the horror.
Very much so. very much so.
It's very sweet. It's very nice.
I really like that, especially where it's at right now. But also, like, in terms of gay horror podcasts, I just want to give a shout out to Maybell for all the Woollawa. It's all Woollawa and women of colour, and it's written by women of colour who are lesbians. Like, it's a great little horror podcast. I really like it. Also, Alice Isn't Dead, another great horror podcast about lesbians that has a happy ending, by the way. And, of course, Welcome to Night Vale, the originator. Gay romance as solace is like the whole vibe of Night Vale.
I guess horror is also just a genre that gay people love a lot.
Yes.
Because there is a lot of gay subtext in horror and a lot of just gay content in horror, even if it's not always, like, good.
And it's very cathartic.
Even if it's often, like, quite problematic, it's still quite cathartic. Like, there's movies like, I don't know, Nightmare on Elm Street 2, things like that.
Yeah. And also, I think there is a perception in horror that a lot of the time the unlikely person is the one that survives. You know, the one that's different is the one that survives. Or the one that's perceived as the weakest is the one that survives. So I think that's like an attraction as well. And also we've had horror movies in recent years that have built on that a bit more and actually had marginalised people, particularly you could talk for hours about how horror treats people with disability, and I don't feel like it's my place to talk about it to a great extent. But I have noticed there's been a lovely little tiny trend of horror films that sort of people who are disabled in some way, people who have the most advantage in these settings. I mean, you and I really love the movie Dawn of the Deaf.
Yes, that's a short film, but it's supposedly being made into a feature-length one.
We're still waiting. Obviously, there's the other big movie that everyone knows about, which is A Quiet Place. But, you know, I think you could also argue Get Out is playing with that idea of the black person always dies and is flipping that on its head. I really like that we're seeing that happen. I hope we see more of it. I am very guilty, though, of not watching a lot of horror from non-Western countries, and I actually want to compile a list of, like, more.
Oh, I can give you a list.
Please give me a list.
Southeast Asian horror, especially Thai horror, is where it's at.
I have heard this.
Your little fucking Hereditaries, your little fucking Midsommars, your St. Mauds and your Vavitches, they have nothing on Southeast Asian horror. We've been talking about how Jennifer's Body is a relatively fresh take on women's assault in horror, but Shudder from 2004 already did this in a very similar way. Not the exact same, but it's very much the same concept. Take a look at anything Joko Anwar has done, anything Anusha Bunyawatana has done, anything the Mo Brothers or the Phobia movies. Southeast Asian horror, it's just banging. Like, it's where it's at. And
I have heard this.
I think you need to watch horror that's made by people who actually believe in ghosts. Not to say that we all believe in ghosts, but most Southeast Asian cultures will have a totally different relationship to spirituality and ghosts and death that's completely different to anything that you're familiar with in Western horror. We have our own monsters too.
I actually didn't realise how much of the horror that I enjoy is made by people of colour. I guess that makes sense, me being a person of colour and all. I don't think it's an accident that Jennifer's Body, like one of the biggest cult classic films now, that was made by a woman of colour. Got Jordan Peele, obviously. But I also want to bring up my main guy, my main dude, James Wan.
Yes! He's Malaysian-Australian.
I do think it's crazy that James Wan birthed the most successful modern horror cinematic universe with The Conjuring. And here in Australia, the country that he is a citizen of, we never talk about that. I mean, I know why. I don't want to talk about how Australian media doesn't appreciate him. I want to talk about how I appreciate him. I love James Wan's horror. I'm a huge fan of all the Conjuring movies. And I'm not just talking about like the main Conjuring movies, I'm talking about all the spin-offs too. I think he's got a real gift with it, and I really appreciated watching Aquaman. I could tell like he was filming the action scenes the way he films horror scenes, because there were so many points in that movie where characters are just chilling and there's like a jump scare equivalent of like action. But yeah, I love James Wan. I think he's really talented, and I have heard he's going to try and remake Train to Busan. Was that him that they were going to get to do that?
When Train to Busan came out, they announced that he would be doing an American remake of it. I actually don't like Train to Busan. So I'm looking forward to whenever James Wan gets to remake it, because maybe he can make it something good.
Fair enough.
Also, Bong Joon-ho makes really good horror movies.
He does.
The Host is excellent. I would say Memories of Murder is also kind of a horror movie. It's like the blueprint. Memories of Murder was like what David Fincher ripped off in order to make Zodiac, so please watch that if you haven't.
What are you doing? Admitting that David Fincher is a hack?
He's not a hack! Everything Fincher does is for the girls and the gays, okay?
Okay. But yeah, I feel like I've said all I want to say. My favorite horror movie of recent years is Ready or Not.
Really?
Yeah, definitely up there. Not as high as Enter in the Apocalypse. That's just like God tier. But also, my other favorite horror movie of recent years, and I can't believe I've gone this whole episode without mentioning it, is A Cure for Wellness.
Yes!
I friggin' love this movie. I really like horror where you don't know what's going on, but it strikes that perfect balance between not knowing enough, but also like you're not left so much in the dark that you're just annoyed. A Cure for Wellness does this so well, pardon the pun. I feel like you and I are like the only two people on earth who like it.
Cure for Wellness is just like, even though it's 2 hours and 20 minutes, I was fully engaged with it for a full 2 hours. I friggin' love Gore Verbinski's direction. Like, he's just a craftsman.
He is.
You said that you think that all the good horror is things that you can't quite understand. Things that you have to think about.
Yeah, because I think once you understand it, you stop being scared of it. That's what I love about A Cure for Wellness. It's literally that horror of not understanding what's happening to your body or what people are doing to you. And I just want to quickly mention, I read a really great book recently that did this exact thing, like very much A Cure for Wellness vibes. It's a book debut by a Black American author called Lakewood by Megan Giddings. It is so good. I can't recommend it enough.
Other than Jennifer's Body, I really love Possession. I really love The Untamed from 2016. I like Event Horizon a lot. That's a sci-fi horror. I love Good Manners, as we've already mentioned. I actually really love The Woman in Black. That's the scariest movie I've ever seen. I was literally like crying when I watched it, and my friend was laughing at me. I don't know if this is classified as horror, but a lot of people say it is. I think it's just gothic. Picnic at Hanging Rock.
Yeah, I'd say it's more gothic, but yeah, you can argue that it's horror.
I love The Cell. I love the original Suspiria. Let the Right One In, the original. And Thirst by Park Chan-wook is the best vampire movie of all time. Oh, and Funny Games.
Also, just some classic horror is American Werewolf in London. I really liked this movie as a child a lot. I used to watch it all the time. Just a shout out to shark movies. I love shark movies, and just so everyone knows, I do root for the shark every single time. I am not cheering for these hoes who get in the water. I am cheering for the shark every day, all day.
Also because it's kind of like a lesbian classic, even though it's also kind of eye-rolly, is The Hunger. It's just a sexy movie. I saw the original Candyman recently and I really loved it as well.
I want to watch the original Candyman before I see the new one, but I am also excited for the new one.
It keeps getting pushed back and I'm sad.
I know, but everything keeps getting pushed back.
Oh, and Helter Skelter. I fucking love Helter Skelter. But yeah, in conclusion, horror is
Horror
gay.
is for the gays.
Yeah. Jennifer's Body is good. It's gay. And
horror comedy is underappreciated, and there should be more horror comedy, and there should be more horror films that empower marginalized people instead of killing them. And there should be more people watching horror that's not Western, and that's a direct call out to me. My last thing I want the Australian media to take away from this podcast is like James Wan deserves more recognition. Not from the world, he's got plenty of recognition from the world, but like from the Australian media specifically.
Yes! Cover him the way that you cover all the white Australians.
Yeah. I hope everyone has a good spooky season.
And watch something scary.
Watch something scary for a change, yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye.